Hey guys, tonight we slip into the kind of place where history sweats, sings, and spills its drink on your boots. You stand outside a small, timber-framed building that leans a little to the left, as if it's as tipsy as the people inside. The air smells of malt and wood smoke. From within, you hear the low murmur of voices, a burst of laughter, a dog barking, and a fiddle string snapping mid-song. You're about to step into a medieval alehouse, a world that brewed together beer, gossip, and the occasional brawl. You probably won't survive this if you're hoping for good hygiene or decent table manners. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the oak door and step into a haze of smoke and chatter. The floor beneath your boots is packed earth, sticky with spilled ale and a century of footsteps. A fire burns in the center of the room, the only light besides a few guttering candles whose wax pools onto rough-hewn tables. The walls are blackened with soot and laughter because, yes, even laughter leaves a stain when it's soaked in ale. The air is thick with smell, roasted onions, damp wool, unwashed humanity, and the sharp tanks of fermentation. You might wrinkle your nose, but remember this was perfume to the medieval peasant. A sign of warmth, of company, of not being alone with the endless cold outside. A few heads turn your way. Travelers are noticed here, especially ones with clean hands. A man in a patched tunic squints at you over his mug, deciding whether you're a tax collector, a pilgrim, or something far worse, a sober person. You give a friendly nod and edge toward the hearth. In a medieval village, the alehouse wasn't just where people drank, it was the beating heart of social life. Most homes were too small, too smoky, and too cold for gatherings, so people met where the ale was poured. Historians still argue whether these places were more like family parlors or low-key dens of sin, but everyone agrees they were the social glue of village life. You take a seat on a rough bench, and immediately a sleepy dog decides your foot looks like a good pillow. Across the room, a group of men in coarse woolen hoods lean close together, muttering over a small wooden cup of dice. Their laughter comes in sudden bursts, the kind that sounds suspiciously like someone's losing his wages. Behind the counter, board set across to barrows, a woman with strong arms and a quicker tongue fills mugs from a ceramic pitcher. She's the alewife, and she runs this place like a queen without a crown. Brewing was often women's work, and a good batch of ale could make or break a household's income. You watch her pour, and you can almost hear her calculating how much profit each cup brings. "Careful with that one," says a voice beside you. You glance over to see an old man with a beard that could hide a spoon. Her allele have you singing psalms backward before dawn. He grins, showing a proud lack of teeth, and takes a sip of his own. You raise your mug in thanks, even though you haven't got one yet. The ale arrives. It's cloudy, warm, and smells faintly of wet bread, but that's how it's supposed to be. Medieval ale wasn't the clear, cold drink you know today. It was thick, yeasty, more like liquid bread than beer, and brewed without hops until around the 15th century. People drank it not just for fun, but for survival. The fermentation process killed off much of the bacteria that made water dangerous. You take your first sip. It's sour, heavy, oddly comforting. You're not sure if it's good or bad, only that it's definitely alive. "That'll put hair on your teeth," the old man chuckles. The noise in the room swells as more villagers crowd in. Farmers finished with their day's labor, a tinker passing through, a pair of young lovers pretending not to stare at each other. A slice of the entire medieval world condensed into one smoky room. Somewhere near the door, a friar is laughing too loudly for a man of God. Maybe he's here to bless the ale, though he looks more like he's here to test it repeatedly. You lean back and watch how life moves here. Deals are made over mugs, arguments settle with slaps on the shoulder, and gossip moves faster than a carrier pigeon on payday. Someone is whispering about the Reeves' daughter sneaking off with a traveling musician. Someone else swears the miller's been cheating with weights again. The alehouse is the medieval version of the internet, loud, unreliable, but irresistibly entertaining. Historians still debate exactly how respectable these places were. Some records call them the mother of all sin. Others praise them as the solace of honest labor. Truth, as usual, probably sat somewhere between spilled ale and good intentions. A gust of wind rattles the shutters, and for a moment, the only sound is the crackle of the fire. You watch sparks drift up toward the rafters, where cured meats hang like sleepy bats. Above the door, a crude charm of feathers and bones dangles, meant to keep away witches or thieves. Depending on who you ask, one quirky detail scholars have noted: many alehouses were marked by unique symbols rather than written signs, since few could read. A broom, a fish, or even a boot nailed above the door might tell you what kind of crowd to expect. You glance up now and spot a faded wooden carving shaped like a tankard. Straightforward marketing. Your eyes adjust to the dim light. The rough beauty of it begins to unfold the uneven glow on faces. The glitter of spilled ale catching the firelight. The low hum of human life layered with clinking mugs and quiet jokes. You realize this isn't just a drinking place. It's an escape hatch from the grind of medieval survival. Outside, life is cold, hierarchical, and relentlessly agricultural. Inside, the alehouse turns peasants into storytellers, beggars into philosophers, and farmers into poets, at least until the drink wears off. A young man near the fire lifts a jug and calls out, "To St. Arnold, patron of brewers." Everyone cheers half-heartedly. St. Arnold of Soissons supposedly convinced people to drink beer instead of water during an epidemic, saving countless lives. You silently toast him, grateful for his contribution to public health and questionable decisions. The alewife slams another pitcher onto the table. Her cheeks are flushed, her sleeves rolled, and she's arguing with a customer about short measure. You catch phrases like "you'll drink what's poured" and "may your sheep dry up," which sounds like a local curse. A few heads turn, but nobody interferes. The alewife runs the show, and crossing her is social suicide. You glance around and notice something subtle: the way people watch her, half in admiration, half in fear. A woman in control of alcohol was powerful in a time when most women weren't allowed to own much of anything. Some parish records show that alewives were fined or even accused of witchcraft if their brewing was too successful. You sip again, feeling the faint bitterness of that fact mixed into the drink. The night deepens, and the room hums like a living organism. Someone starts to hum a tune, a slow, haunting melody about a sailor who traded his soul for a cask of good ale. Others join in, their voices rough but sincere. The sound vibrates through the floorboards, into your bones. You close your eyes, just for a moment. The smell of malt, the flicker of firelight, the rise and fall of song, it's all so human. Messy, joyful, unpolished humanity. And somewhere in that haze, you realize you've slipped perfectly into the rhythm of this world. You're not an observer anymore. You're just another traveler, warming your hands and waiting for the next story to pour. Outside, the wind howls like a distant wolf. Inside, the alehouse glows on its door, a thin wooden line between survival and celebration. You stay seated by the hearth, your mug still warm in your hand, as you start to notice the faces around you. Each one has its own story carved into the lines and shadows, lit unevenly by the orange pulse of firelight. The flicker turns everyone into half saints, half scoundrels. You can't quite tell who's praying and who's plotting. The alehouse feels like the center of the world, and tonight, every story worth hearing will begin and end right here. Across from you, a pair of men argue about whether the king's new tax will drive them to ruin. One of them gestures wildly with his cup, spilling ale into the fire, and the flames hiss like a judgmental priest. "He takes our coin and leaves us our mud." The man grumbles. His friend shrugs. Better mud than the gallows. They both laugh too loudly, maybe to drown out the truth in it. You scan further. A merchant in a dark cloak sits in the corner, counting something beneath the table. Beside him, a hooded friar nurses his drink with suspicious solemnity, as though he's praying over each sip. A group of village girls giggle near the back wall, trying to warm their hands and flirt at the same time. And in the shadow between them all, you spot a minstrel with a battered luta's eyes half closed. His mouth ready to sing or scheme, whichever earns him more ale. The alehouse is a crossroads of class, a place where the strict order of medieval life bends just enough to let people breathe. Out there, peasants bow to lords. In here, they drink from the same pitcher. The friar might preach against sin by day and drink beside a carpenter by night. Even the reeve might loosen his belt and forget his duties for a few sweet hours. It's democracy, medieval style, liquid, and temporary. Historians still argue whether this kind of social mixing truly broke barriers or just hid them for a while. Some records say the alehouse fostered neighborly fellowship. Others call it a gateway to riot. But sitting here, you can feel the fragile balance to much laughter, and someone will take offense. Too much silence, and the room will sour. The alewife wipes her hands on her apron and eyes the friar. "You'll bless my brew tomorrow, won't you, father?" she says. Her tone is teasing, but her glance sharp. "If you bless it tonight, I might even make it stronger." The room bursts into laughter. The friar raises his mug. "Woman, your ale needs no blessing. It works miracles already." A clever dodge. You smile, watching how humor dances between faith and mockery here. People test the boundaries of what can be said. A joke can be safety or rebellion. And tonight, the air feels ripe for both. A dog growls near the door, its fur bristling. You glance up and see two travelers step in mud on their boots, cold in their eyes. Their cloaks are heavy with road dust, their expressions cautious. The alewife sizes them up instantly. "You can leave your knives by the door. Loves," she says sweetly, "or keep them but by 2 mugs first." They choose to pay. Wise choice. The older of the two throws back his hood, revealing a scar that snakes from temple to jaw. "We've come from Norwich," he says, voice low. "The roads are full of thieves, and worse." He doesn't elaborate, but you notice how the other man keeps glancing at the door as if expecting company or trouble. People shuffle a little closer to the fire, partly for warmth, partly for the story that's about to unfold. Travelers mean news. News means gossip. Gossip means the night gets interesting. The scarred man takes a deep gulp and leans forward. They say the plagues returned in the south. His words drop like stones in a quiet pond. The chatter softens. Even the dog seems to listen. "Not again," someone mutters. "That's God's punishment, sure as sin." Another voice pipes up, "Or the devil's work through bad air." A few cross themselves. A few roll their eyes. The friar clears his throat. "No need to spread fear, my son. The pestilence burns itself out every few years." But his knuckles are white around his mug. You watch how quickly the tone shifts from laughter to dread to weary acceptance. It's a rhythm medieval people know too well. The world outside the alehouse is full of hunger, disease, and war. Inside, they fight back the only way they can with ale, jokes, and the illusion that the night will last forever. A serving boy scurries by with a tray of bread and onions. You snag a piece. The crust is so hard it could be used as a weapon, but the inside is soft, warm, soaked with a little ale that's sloshed over. You chew and listen. A young woman at the table near you tells her friend about a ghost that walks near the mill after dark. "My cousin swears he saw it," she says, her eyes wide. "White as flour, carrying a lantern." "That's not a ghost," her friend says. "That's your cousin's reflection when he's drunk." Laughter ripples again. The friar crosses himself just in case. You sip your ale, noticing how quickly these faces change suspicion to laughter, fear to warmth, all within moments. In a world so uncertain, emotion is currency. They spend it freely, then start again. A historian might tell you that the alehouse was one of the few places where oral culture thrived. Here, people passed news, stories, even protest songs long before they were ever written down. It was the medieval version of social media, only stickier and far less anonymous. A single joke about the local lord could travel 10 miles by morning, carried on ale-scented breath. Someone shouts, "Play us a tune." Will. The minstrel straightens, adjusts his lute, and plucks a few tentative strings. The room quiets, all eyes turning toward him. His fingers move like they've done this 1,000 times, and maybe they have. He starts to sing not the holy kind of song, but the kind that makes you grin despite yourself. It's about a knight who wooed a barmaid, then woke up married to her and half her debts. The refrain has a catchy rhythm, and by the third verse, everyone's clapping in time. Even the friar is smiling, though he covers it with his sleeve. Music in the alehouse wasn't just entertainment, it was memory. Most couldn't read, so songs carried lessons, warnings, and news. Some told of heroes, others of scandal, and a few like this one reminded everyone that love and ale often came with regret in equal measure. Between verses, Will grins at the crowd. "Now, I've got another song, but the church says I shouldn't sing it." Then sing it twice. Someone yells, the room howls with laughter. Historians still argue whether the alehouse encouraged moral decay or simply revealed it. One friar wrote that sin begins with the first sip. But another chronicler admitted that even monks kept their own breweries. You take another swallow and decide that sin never tasted this lively. The song ends to thunderous applause and the clatter of mugs. Will bows deeply, then leans over to the alewife. Another pitcher for the table that clapped the loudest. She smirks. "You're buying, minstrel, on credit." He grins. As always, the dog under your bench snores now, oblivious to the rising noise. Someone starts another argument near the door about whether Robin Hood ever truly existed. "He's real enough when taxes come due," a man grumbles. "He just forgets to visit my village." The scarred traveler laughs a dry, hard laugh. "I met a man who claimed to be Robin once," he says. "He robbed me blind." The crowd bursts into another round of laughter. And through it all, you realize how this place holds its people together. The fire, the ale, the laughter there, the fragile barriers keeping despair outside. Maybe that's why they keep refilling their cups. As the night thickens, you notice how the shadows grow softer, the conversation slower, the air warmer. The friar has nodded off mid-prayer. The merchant's coins have disappeared, probably into someone else's sleeve. The alewife hums quietly as she wipes down a table, her face weary but proud. One quirky fact that floats through your mind. In some English towns, alehouses were actually required to hang a green branch outside their door whenever fresh ale was brewed. It was called an ale stake, a kind of medieval neon sign. If you saw greenery, you knew the ale was new. You glance at the wooden beam above the fire and imagine a sprig of ivy swaying in the smoke. Maybe it was there once, signaling to every weary traveler that warmth and madness awaited within. The night moves like a tide rising, falling, carrying everyone with it. You sip the dregs of your ale and realize that time here isn't counted in hours, but in refills. The fire spits, the room sways gently, and you wonder how many generations before you sat right here, chasing the same flicker of comfort through the haze. A laugh echoes. Someone toasts to another night survived. You raise your mug, because that feels exactly right. Your mug is nearly empty now, but before you can set it down, the alewife catches your eye and nods toward the counter. You take the hint. The crowd has thinned just enough for you to weave through without spilling what's left of someone else's drink on your boots. As you pass, a man snores face down on a table while another tries to balance a spoon on his forehead, both lost to the evening. At the counter, the alewife fills a fresh jug straight from the cask. The sound is almost soothing. A slow, wet glug, followed by the hiss of froth. "It's from yesterday's brew," she says, setting it in front of you. "Still good mostly." Her tone is the kind that leaves room for hope, but not promises. You take a sip. It's warmer, sour, and somehow thicker than before. Medieval ale wasn't pasteurized, so it changed with every hour it sat. Some batches were sweet and bready. Others could peel the enamel off your teeth. You nod appreciatively anyway, because complaining about ale to an alewife is like telling a blacksmith his anvil's too loud. Around you, people have turned their attention to the food. Trenchers, those thick slabs of stale bread that double as plates, are scattered across the tables. On them sit stewed beans, onions, maybe a sliver of salted pork if someone's had a lucky week. The smell is earthy, sour, and human in a way that makes you oddly grateful. Nothing here is fancy, but everything keeps you alive. You watch a boy mop up stew with a chunk of bread, then toss the trenchers into a bucket once the food's gone. Later, the scraps will be fed to pigs or to the poorest beggars outside. Nothing goes to waste, not even crumbs soaked in ale. There's a soft argument near the fire about whether bread or cheese is better for soaking up drink. A gray-haired mason swears by cheese, claiming it soothes the stomach like a prayer. The friar, somehow revived, disagrees. Bread, he insists, because it reminds us of the body of Christ. Then your Christ must be stale, someone mutters, and the table explodes in laughter. Historians still argue whether such humor was blasphemous or just village banter. The church preached moderation, but the people here lived too close to hunger and hardship to take moral lectures seriously. A little irreverence helped the ale go down smoother. You take another mouthful and realize just how central this drink was to survival. Water could kill you. Milk was for calves and children. Ale was nourishment, hydration, and courage in one cloudy gulp. It was often brewed at home, mostly by women, who passed down recipes like family secrets. Some historians call this the alewife economy, a quiet but vital industry run from hearths and backyards. Each house its barrel, the alewife says, overhearing your thoughts as if she's been reading minds all night. Some brew for themselves. Some brew for all, but when their ale goes bad, they come to me. She smirks, wipes her hands, and leans closer. And when mine goes bad, I tell them it's a holy fast. You laugh, nearly choking on your drink. You'd make a fine priest, you say. Too honest, she replies. A group of farmers enters, shaking off the cold. They carry baskets grain, barley, and hops from the next shire over. One of them explains proudly that he's tried something new. Bit of a bitter taste from them foreign hops that catches your attention. Before the 1400s, most ale was made without hops. It was flavored with gruda, mix of herbs like yarrow, heather, and bog myrtle. The use of hops spread from Flanders into England, changing both taste and shelf life. But not everyone welcomed the change. Many claimed hops were a wicked and pernicious weed. Even Henry VIII later tried to ban it, saying it spoiled the taste of good ale. You glance at the farmer's brew and wonder whether you're sipping history's most controversial plant. The alewife tries it first, eyes narrowing. It's bitter, she says, but I've known worse men. The room laughs again, and the farmer beams, half insulted, half enarred. You find a seat beside the merchants, who've started discussing prices. One pulls out a small balance scale and a pouch of barley. The other squints suspiciously. You've been adding sand again, he accuses. The first man clutches his chest. Sir, I'm as honest as the church. That earns another round of snorts. In truth, medieval ale could vary wildly in strength and price. Some towns even set official ale-tasting days, where inspectors known as ale conners would test quality by literally sitting in spilled beer. If their leather breeches stuck to the bench, the brew was deemed strong enough. One quirky piece of history, equal parts practical and absurd. You imagine being that tester and realize people will do anything for free drinks and civic duty. A crash interrupts your thoughts. Someone's overturned a stool, though it seems more by accident than anger. The minstrel, back at his corner, raises his lute again. "Let's calm our tempers with a song of brewing," he declares. He strums a playful melody while reciting the brewer's blessing. Grain from the earth. Fire for the flame, water to mix, may none bring shame. Yeast from the air, saints from the sky. If the ale goes flat, then let me die. The crowd joins in the last line, half sincere, half drunk. The friar claps along, but replaces die with repent, earning groans from the table. As the laughter fades, a younger woman at the bar begins humming something softer cradle tune, almost a lullaby. It's oddly beautiful among the rowdy noise. The alewife listens, then joins for a verse. Her voice is deep and worn, carrying that melancholy sweetness that only comes from hard work and harder winters. You feel your shoulders loosen without realizing it. A dog yawns. The fire pops. For a moment, the alehouse feels like a hearth large enough for the whole village. Then someone sneezes violently into his sleeve and mutters about the bad air. You catch the phrase. Again, people still believe illness rides on the wind, not in the body. They hang herbs above the door, drink stronger ale, or pray to Saint Rock. Fear is everywhere, but it's dressed up in superstition and ale foam. The merchant beside you offers a thin smile. They say garlic keeps the plague away. And women, his friend adds. "Then pour me another," he says, and they both roar with laughter. You glance down at your ale, cloudy in the firelight, and think how strange it is that something so humble defined an entire era. Without beer, the medieval economy would collapse. Monasteries brewed thousands of gallons a year. Peasants were paid in ale rations. Even children drank small beer, a weak version safer than water. It was medicine, paycheck, and comfort rolled into one wooden cup. Historians still argue how drunk medieval people actually were. Some claim they lived in a permanent state of mild buzz. Others say the low alcohol content made it more like tea than tequila. Judging by the man now serenading the dog with off-key love songs, you suspect the truth lies somewhere between. You wipe the foam from your lips and realize you've been sitting for hours. The air is thicker, the laughter slower, but the mood remains steady warm, steady, alive. The alewife catches your gaze again. "Still breathing?" she asks. "Barely," you reply. "Then you're drinking it, right?" She leans on the counter, tired but alert. "Funny thing," she muses. "Folk think ale makes men brave. But it's the quiet ones, it saves the ones too tired to talk." She glances toward the corner, where the scarred traveler from earlier now dozes upright, his head against the wall. "He's seen war," she adds softly. "Comes here to forget. We all do." You nod. The alehouse, for all its noise and heat, is really a sanctuary of forgetting. A place to set down your burdens beside the empty mugs and the stories that repeat themselves night after night. Outside, a bell tolls in the distance. Maybe curfew, maybe a warning. Inside, no one moves to leave. The friar mutters something about finishing his prayers first. The minstrel tunes his strings again. You pour the last of your ale and feel the warmth trickle through you, as if the fire itself has crept inside your chest. You wonder what tomorrow's batch will taste like, sweet, sour, or maybe a little of both, like life itself. The alewife yawns. "We'll brew again come dawn," she says, stretching. Same grain, same water, same foolishness. You raise your mug in mock salute. "To foolishness," you echo. She smiles tiredly, then adds, "and to another night survived." The words linger as the fire dims, the taste of bittersweet ale still on your tongue, mix of work, hope, and the unspoken promise that there will always be another drink, another night, Another chance to start over in this fragile, fermented world. The minstrel's strings hum again, and the whole room begins to tilt toward song. The alewife dims the lantern near the counter, leaving the fire as the only source of light. Its glow clings to the air like honey, soft and wavering, and you feel it tug you closer to the sound. Every night here seems to lean toward music. Eventually it's how the villagers trade their burdens for laughter, or at least for something that sounds close enough. Will the minstrel clears his throat with great ceremony. Now, he says, voice loud enough to reach even the back tables, this one's for the sinners, the saints and those who haven't decided yet. Someone shouts, "That's all of us." And the room bursts into applause before the first chord is even struck. He starts slow, his lute moaning like it knows the tune before his voice joins in. The melody is simple 3 notes that loop, bend, and return. His song tells of a plowman who fell in love with the reeve's daughter, how he sang to her through the hedgerow, and how her father's dog bit him somewhere no man wants bitten. The lyrics are bawdy, the rhymes clumsy but sincere, and by the 3rd verse, everyone's joined in. You catch yourself humming too. You don't know the words, but that doesn't matter. The alehouse turns into one great, breathing choir off key, loud and entirely alive. Music was the social glue of the Middle Ages. Before radio, before books for most people, songs carried everything. News, lessons, jokes, gossip, and warnings. Traveling minstrels were walking archives of the human condition. They learned verses from one town and changed them slightly in the next. Over time, a single song could mutate like a living thing, carrying traces of every voice it passed through. Historians still argue whether these songs were true records of peasant life or simply escapist fantasies. But the line between truth and entertainment here is as blurry as the ale you're drinking. The song ends with raucous laughter, followed by a mock bow. Someone tosses the minstrel a coin or maybe a button. You're not sure on he pockets it either way. More. A woman shouts, "Sing us the one about the baker's wife." "Aye," echoes another. "The one where she, mind your manners," interrupts the friar, though he's smiling as he says it. The minstrel sighs theatrically. You people have no sense of piety. Then, grinning, he starts to pluck again. This time the melody is faster, lighter, full of the kind of mischief that keeps the church up at night. He sings of a baker's wife who sold more than bread and of how the local priest paid for confession in installments. The verses bounce with sly innuendo, and by the end of the refrain, the room is howling. You almost choke on your drink. Even the alewife wipes tears of laughter from her cheeks. For a moment, it feels like sin has been replaced by solidarity. Everyone laughs because everyone's guilty of something: lust, greed, or just the small crime of wanting a better life. The friar shakes his head, but can't resist a grin. One day he says, "You'll sing that tune in hell. Then I'll have the devil on harmony." Will shoots back. You watch the way humor melts fear here. In a world bound by rules of class, of faith, of survival, laughter is rebellion. The alehouse is its stage. A farmer near the window begins to whistle another tune, this one slower. It's not funny this time, it's longing. The melody pulls the room into stillness. He sings about a lost harvest and the wife he buried last winter. His voice cracks on the last line, but no one laughs. The minstrel lowers his head. The alewife pours him a mug and sets it down quietly. You realize how songs in this world aren't just for fun, they're medicine. They patch the holes in people's hearts just enough to last until morning. Good voice, the friar murmurs. Better heart, the alewife answers. Someone begins to hum again, a gentler tune. The melody twists into a familiar pattern, the Agincourt carol, or something close. You recall the real one, Dio Gratia's Anglia, Retha pro Victoria. Historians know it as one of the oldest English carols celebrating the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. It's strange how these people, most of whom can't read, carry fragments of national memory in their heads, passed down like hand-me-down songs. The alewife joins in, her voice steady, proud. "They say my grandfather sang this," she says softly, "when he was a boy, for half the men never came home again." A silence follows. Not heavy, but full, like everyone's holding the same memory, even if they never lived it. The minstrel senses the shift and changes tone again. "We've had enough sorrow," he says. "Let's wake the dead with noise." He slaps the side of his lute for rhythm. A tanner grabs a spoon and beats time on a jug. Someone finds a drum, or maybe just a bucket, and soon the alehouse is pounding with rhythm. You clap along, drawn into the pulse of it. The air tastes like smoke and sweat and malt. You can feel the floor tremble under boots stomping in unison. A jug of ale makes its way around, and you drink without thinking whose hand it passed from. This is what a medieval party feels like, not refinement, not grace, but raw communion. Everyone, rich or poor, sinner or saint, moving to the same beat until the boundaries blur. Historians still debate whether peasants truly felt joy amid such hardship, or if moments like this were rare sparks against the dark. But looking around now, you can see it clearly. Joy isn't luxury here, it's resistance. It's how people remind themselves that they're still alive. A small boy, no older than 10, stands near the door, watching with wide eyes. His mother, one of the serving women, shoos him back toward the corner, but Will notices. "Come on, lad," he calls. "Got any songs in you?" The boy shakes his head, blushing. "Don't lie," Will teases. "Everyone's got one." After some coaxing, the boy mumbles a rhyme about St. George and the dragon. It's clumsy, half forgotten, but the crowd listens as though it's a sermon. When he finishes, the room cheers. Will bows to him. "You'll steal my job soon enough." The alewife ruffles the boy's hair and mutters. He already drinks like a bard. Everyone laughs again. One quirky historical tidbit crosses your mind. Some towns actually required alehouses to host public singing. It was believed that music discouraged fighting and gambling, though, judging by the dice rolling on the far table. The rule worked about as well as medieval plumbing. The fire crackles louder as a log collapses. Sparks leap up, painting the smoke gold for a heartbeat before vanishing. The music fades, replaced by murmurs, giggles, and the soft clink of mugs. You look around, dizzy from warmth, noise, and maybe a bit of the ale itself. The room feels timeless. If you stripped away the clothes and swapped the instruments, this could be any century, any gathering where people sing because silence is too heavy. Will sits beside you now, sweat shining on his brow. "You've been quiet, friend," he says. "Thinking or drinking?" "Both," you answer. "In here, it's the same thing." He chuckles. The best songs start with one and end with the other." He plucks idly at his lute, the notes wandering, searching. "Do you know," he says, "some say music drives away spirits. Others say it calls them closer. Which do you believe?" You ask. "Depends who's listening." He grins. The alewife refills his mug. "Sing one more before we all drift off," she says. "Something soft." He nods. This time, the tune is almost a whisper. It's about a sailor who follows the moon across the sea, never realizing it's just his own reflection he's chasing. His voice falls and rises like tidewater. The room stills completely. You can hear the creak of the rafters, the breathing of the sleepers, even your own heartbeat slowing to match the rhythm. For a moment, the alehouse isn't loud or filthy or full of sin. It's sacred. The kind of sacred the church can't claim, born, not from fear, but from the fragile beauty of being human. When the song ends, nobody claps, nobody speaks. The silence itself feels like applause. Then, softly, the alewife says, "Another round for everyone who still believes in moonlight." You raise your cup. It tastes sweeter this time. Or maybe you're just hearing the echo of that melody in every swallow. Outside, the wind scratches the shutters. Inside, you feel the last note of the song linger long after it's gone, like a secret prayer for the kind of peace only a place like this can give. By the time the last notes fade into the fire's soft hiss, the alehouse has shifted once again. The air, once bright with laughter and music, now hums with something subtler, half-drunk reflection. The kind that only settles after enough ale has blurred the hard edges of the day. The crowd has thinned. A few have gone home, guided by lantern light and wobbly steps, but most remain, unwilling to face the chill night outside. You lean back on the rough bench, your fingers sticky with dried ale, watching as Will, the minstrel, wipes his lute strings and tucks the instrument behind him. He's joined by a short, red-nosed man with a wooden pipe and eyes like mischievous embers. "Name's Tom," he says. "Local storyteller. Mind if I borrow the silence a bit?" He doesn't wait for an answer. The alewife rolls her eyes, but lets him continue clearly this isn't his first performance. Right then, Tom begins, resting his elbows on the table. Not a song tonight, a tale. Something to chase the cold away. The crowd murmurs approval. Storytelling is the nightcap of medieval life. No one here owns books. Parchment costs more than a cow. So words are currency, and men like Tom are the bankers of imagination. He clears his throat and begins in a hush that pulls everyone closer. "There was once a monk," he says, "who brewed beer so good that angels got drunk on the scent alone." Laughter ripples through the room. He grins, emboldened. One night, the devil himself crept into the abbey, wanting a taste. But when he tried to steal a barrel, the monk caught him by the tail. The devil begged, swore he'd trade a favor for just one sip. So the monk, being clever, as monks tend to be when no one's watching, offered him the dregs from the bottom of the vat. Tom pauses, taking a sip of ale for dramatic effect. "And that," he says, "is why the last mouthful of every mug still tastes like sign." The room bursts into laughter. Even the friar snorts into his sleeve. The best stories here, you realize, walk the thin line between sacred and scandalous. In medieval Europe, tales weren't just entertainment. They were coded reflections of belief, superstition, and local gossip. The church tolerated them, barely, as long as the moral ended with God winning. But in places like this, that rule bends easily. Tom moves to his next tale, one of witches who dance under the full moon, turning milk sour and making the priest's beard fall out. Historians still argue, you recall, whether common folk actually believed in witches then or whether the church's paranoia created them. But here, in this smoky room, no one's debating theology. They just love a story with a curse, a chase, and a cheeky ending. As Tom's words unwind, you notice the faces around you lit by firelight, open, enthralled. This is more than a pastime. It's a ritual. The alehouse becomes a theater. The flickering shadows, its moving scenery. Tom finishes with a flourish, declaring that the witch escaped in the shape of a cat. "And that's why you don't trust a black one," he adds, tapping the table for effect. A woman nearby crosses herself. Another woman rolls her eyes. "Or maybe you just don't like competition," she says, smirking. The laughter returns. "Ah, but speaking of cats," Tom says, leaning in conspiratorially, "you've all heard of the priest's cat, haven't you?" The groans are immediate. Clearly, this is a local favorite. "The one that drinks communion wine." Someone shouts, "The very same." Tom grins. "Caught red-tongued in the sacristy. The priest swore it was possessed, but between you and me, I think it just had taste." Another round of chuckles. Even you can't help but laugh. Storytelling in this world is an art of memory and exaggeration. Nothing is written, so everything mutates. Tom might have heard this tale to villages away, where the monk was a miller and the devil was a tax collector. But tonight, in this room, it becomes a local truth. Will leans toward you and mutters. Next, he'll tell the one about the talking skull. You raise an eyebrow. "Talking skull." "Aye," he whispers. claims it belonged to a knight who cheated death by never shutting up. Tom must have heard, because he slams his cup down. Now that's a fine suggestion. He bellows. The crowd cheers again. He tells it masterfully how a gravedigger found a skull that whispered fortunes for a pint of ale. How the skull predicted a drought, a war, and the gravedigger's own death all while demanding more drink. By the end, Tom's voice drops to a whisper, and when the last drop was gone, the skull said, "That's all the truth I'll ever tell." The room falls still. Then someone mutters, "Maybe it's that one on the shelf behind the bar." The alewife smirks, but doesn't deny it. You glance toward the shelf, and sure enough, there's a cracked human skull beside a jug. You can't tell if it's real, and maybe that's the point. In medieval taverns, skulls often served as memento mori reminders of mortality. Drink up, they seem to say, because tomorrow might not come. You take another sip, just to be safe. A draft sneaks through the door, curling around your ankles like a cold cat. The alewife shivers. "Mind that latch," she calls. Will gets up to close it, but before he does, you catch a glimpse outside fog rolling thick along the lane, the sound of distant laughter or maybe something else. Tom, of course, turns that into another tale. "You hear that?" He says, "That's the wild hunt passing by. Best keep your heads down or they'll drag you along." The room murmurs uneasily. The wild hunt ghostly riders who sweep across the night skies, one of those legends. Everyone claims not to believe, but still fears after dark. Historians still debate whether the wild hunt began as pagan myth or Christian warning. You recall, but in the 14th century, no one here is splitting theological hairs. To them, it's as real as the wind at the door. The friar, half drunk, mutters a quick prayer. The alewife pours herself a small drink insurance, perhaps. Will plucks a single eerie note on his lute, just enough to make the fire seem to flicker differently. Tom lowers his voice. "Once, they say, a man tried to follow the hunt to see where the riders go. He vanished, and when they found his boots by the crossroads, they were still warm." Someone gasps. Someone else laughs nervously. And then, because the tension can't last long in a room this full of ale, Will strums a ridiculous flourish and says, "Well, I'd follow them if they're headed to a better pub." The spell breaks. The laughter floods back. "Best story yet," the alewife says, clapping Tom on the shoulder. She refills his cup, but he waves her off. No, I've had enough. Let someone else lie for a while." "Fine," Will says, "I'll tell one." He stands, stretches, and starts a new tale, not sung this time, but spoken. It's about a knight who returns from the Crusades with a jewel that curses anyone who stares too long. Half the crowd scoffs. Half leans forward. You're in the second group. As he speaks, you realize that Will's voice shifts slightly lower, slower, deliberate. He knows what he's doing. The room tilts toward him again. The jewel turns out to be nothing but colored glass, the curse a trick played by a jealous squire. The moral, Will declares, is simple. Don't trust a man who says God told him to buy him a drink. The friar raises his cup. Amen to that. Laughter follows, and then a softer hum of conversation. The tales begin to overlap, now people swapping their own family legends, superstitions, dreams. You hear a shepherd talking about lights on the moor that lead travelers astray, a potter describing how his grandmother saw St. Bridget in a thunderstorm, and someone else insisting that a fox once stole his shoes. You start to realize everyone here is both storyteller and audience. There's a strange democracy in it. The nobility outside these walls may own land and law, but in the alehouse, anyone with a tongue can command the room. A clever tale is worth more than a coin. You sip again and glance around. The rafters are black with soot. A spider dangles above your head, lazily swaying to the heat rising from the hearth. The smell of roasting onions drifts from the kitchen. The flicker of the fire paints everyone in gold, as though this grimy room were some cathedral of stories. The alewife leans near you and murmurs, "Folk don't come here just for ale. They come to forget, and stories help with that." You nod, and what do you do to forget? She smiles. "Keep the ale flowing so I never have to." As the night deepens, a few people doze where they sit, heads on folded arms. Someone's snoring softly near the hearth. The fire's glow turns orange, then red. Tom speaks again, voice quiet now. "You ever notice," he says, "how every story ends the same way? Someone dies, someone laughs, someone learns. Or no one learns anything," Will adds. "Which makes for the best stories." You smile. You realize how much the alehouse mirrors the world outside, a place full of noise and warmth and foolishness, where truth hides inside jokes and lies carry a bit of wisdom. The alewife calls out, "Last round before I throw you all into the street." Groans and laughter echo back. Someone toasts, "Two lies that sound true." Another adds, "And truths that no one believes." You raise your cup, and for once, everyone drinks in perfect unison. Outside, the fog presses closer to the window. The wild hunter, maybe just the wind, passes unseen. Inside, the stories keep circling like embers that refuse to go out. You lean back, heavy-lidded, half-drunk, half-dreaming, thinking that in this room, words are the only magic anyone really needs. The alewife's last round turns out to be more of a suggestion than a decree. No one really leaves, and she doesn't truly make them. Instead, the night simply stretches. It settles into that peculiar hour when stories start to fade. Songs drift into murmurs, and scandal begins to rise quietly, like smoke through the beams. You're deep enough into your mug now that the air itself seems softer, as though time has decided to move with the rhythm of your heartbeat. At the next table, a group of tradesmen lean close, whispering and laughing. Whatever they're talking about, it isn't saints or harvests. You catch fragments: bailiff's wife, market stall, and behind the granary. The laughter that follows has a particular flavor, mischievous, guilty, and entirely human. You realize, not for the first time, that alehouses aren't just places of song and fellowship. They're the gossip engines of medieval life. News travels faster through cups than through sermons. You can practically see it happen. One rumor slips from mouth to mouth like spilled beer, losing a little truth and gaining twice as much spice with every retelling. Someone leans in to whisper that the Reeves' daughter was caught sneaking into the smithy again. Another swears he saw a monk at her window last week. Historians still argue whether such rumors reflected reality or were simply village entertainment. You remember reading once, "Here, it hardly matters, truth is less important than the pleasure of telling it." You shift slightly, pretending not to listen, but your ears betray you. They're all sharp with ale-fueled storytelling, voices overlapping until it becomes a tapestry of scandal. The tax collector's gone missing. The baron's steward keeps new boots every week, and no one knows how. The miller's wife's belly grows, and her husband's been gone since Lent. The alewife herself joins in occasionally, delivering her opinions with the authority of someone who's heard everything twice and believed none of it. When one of the farmers catches you eavesdropping, he grins and raises his mug. "You look new here," he says. "Don't worry, by morning, we'll have you in at least 3 rumors of your own, just 3. You say I must be underperforming. Laughter bursts around the table. You're in now, one of them. He tells you how gossip often replaces justice. Word of mouth's faster than the sheriff, he says. If someone cheats or lies, the alehouse will have the tale spread by dawn. You imagine that reputation built and broken over cups of ale. In a world without written law for commoners, rumor is the law. Then the door creaks open, letting in a gust of cold and a stranger. He's wrapped in a mud-spattered cloak, hood low, boots thick with road dust. The music and chatter falter for half a heartbeat as every face tilts toward him. This, too, is a ritual. The silent appraisal of an unknown guest. The stranger says nothing at first, only steps toward the fire. His hands are ringless, but his bearing straight-backed, measured betrays a hint of education. The alewife eyes him like a cat deciding whether to scratch or feed. "You're far from home," she says. "Far enough," he answers, voice low and even. "Is there ale left for a traveler?" "For coin, always." She pours him a mug. He drinks deeply, sighs, and finally lowers his hood. His hair is streaked with gray, and a scar curls along his jaw. "Name's Thomas," he says. "From York." "York," Will says, glancing up from his seat. "You've come a long way for bad ale." Thomas smirks. Longer still for worse company. The insult is so cleanly delivered that the crowd bursts into laughter. The tension breaks. He's one of them now. He sits near the fire, stretching out his boots. "What's the news here?" he asks. "Last I heard, your bishop's still arguing about who owns half the tithes." "That's old news," the friar says, wobbling slightly. "He's arguing about who steals them now." Thomas laughs, then glances around. "Every alehouse is the same," he says. "Songs first, then stories, then scenes. What comes next?" "Scandal," the alewife replies dryly. "And you're just in time," the friar hiccups. "I tell him about the tanner's wife." But the tanner's already scowling, so the subject changes quickly. Thomas leans forward. "I could trade you a tale for a drink," he offers. "Something worth hearing." The alewife folds her arms. "Depends on the tale." He sips, then lowers his voice. "It's about a monk who forged indulgences and sold them for kisses." The friar sputters into his cup. The crowd howls with laughter. "Now that's faith I can believe in," Will says. You watch Thomas closely. There's something polished about his delivery, his words too careful, his pauses perfectly timed. He's not just a traveler. He's a professional storyteller, or perhaps a messenger of another kind. "True story, you ask?" Thomas smiles faintly. "It's true as any told after dark." Historians still argue about how information traveled between towns, whether through merchants, clerics, or wandering minstrels. But looking at Thomas, you can see how one man could carry half a kingdom's worth of gossip in his head, pouring it out one cup at a time. He tells another tale, this one about a nobleman's feast where the host discovered his venison. Pies had been filled with rat. The guests, already drunk, declared it the finest meat they'd ever had. "And that," Thomas concludes, "is why I never dine with lords." The alewife claps him on the back. "You'll fit in just fine." The conversation flows again. People drift between tables, trading fragments of rumor. You hear one about a friar caught gambling in Norwich, another about a woman who found a gold coin baked into her bread and declared it a miracle. The friar groans. "If that's all it takes, my loaf's been holy for years." You can't help but grin. The alehouse runs on contradiction. Piety and blasphemy, reverence and filth, laughter and hunger. It's a place where confession comes in laughter instead of kneeling. The alewife wipes her hands on her apron and mutters, "Men talk too much after midnight." Will overhears. So do women knowingly better. "Careful, minstrel," she warns. "I pour your drink," he bows. "Then pour forgiveness to my lady." The crowd oohs and whistles. The alewife smirks and fills his cup anyway. At another table, two men argue about a local scandal: who fathered whose child, who shorted whom on grain, who cheated the parish with false weights. Historians still debate whether medieval villagers were obsessed with morality or merely nosy, you think? Judging by this room, probably both. The alehouse serves as the medieval version of social media: fast, unreliable, but utterly irresistible. You can see it spreading, a whisper here, a laugh there, and soon the whole room has an opinion about something that might not have even happened. The friar climbs onto his stool and raises his mug. "Let us drink," he declares, "to sinners, saints, and all those who confuse the two." The cheer that follows is thunderous. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters again. Someone mutters, "Hope that's not the hunt returning." The alewife rolls her eyes. If it is, they can pay for their own ale this time. Thomas chuckles, then leans toward you. "Funny thing about stories," he says. "The best ones start in places like this, but they never end here." He finishes his drink, stands, and nods to the room. "If you ever reach York, find the Golden Ram and tell them Thomas owes a tale." Then, without another word, he steps back into the fog and is gone. For a long moment, the room stays silent. Then Will strums his lute softly and says he'll either end up a legend or in a ditch. Hard to tell which comes first. The alewife sighs. Both, probably. Her words hang there, echoing faintly. You realize how easily truth and invention blur in a world that records neither. Maybe Thomas was a spy. Maybe he was a pilgrim. Maybe he was nobody at all. The friar finishes his mug and mutters, "A monk who sells kisses." Ha! I'll be praying twice tomorrow. The laughter that follows is quieter now, more tired. The room is thinning. A few villagers nod off in corners. The hearth burns lower, its glow stretched into long shadows that crawl up the walls. You close your eyes for a moment, hearing the soft murmur of voices blending with the pop of the fire. The room smells of yeast and ash and the faint sweetness of sleep. Someone whispers, "He'll come back one day, that Thomas." Men like that always do. You don't know whether they mean it as a promise or a warning. The alewife blows out one of the candles. The darkness deepens, and the voices drift to murmurs, the kind you can barely tell from dreams. Outside, a distant owl calls once, twice. Inside, the last of the ale slips down like the memory of another story waiting to be told. The hour is deep now, the kind of midnight where shadows seem to stretch and sway with the flickering candlelight. The alehouse feels alive in a different way than it did earlier, quieter, yes, but charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. You notice it immediately. The songs have returned, richer and louder, weaving their way through the smoke and chatter, binding the room together like invisible threads. A young fiddler, cheeks flushed with ale and exertion, draws his bow across the strings. The notes are rough, slightly off-key, but they carry a raw energy that captures everyone's attention. The crowd leans in, mugs poised, voices hushed for the first verse. There's a peculiar rhythm to the room now, a heartbeat that matches the slap of boots on the floor, the tap of a tankard against wood, the occasional shout of approval or encouragement. You feel it under your feet, in your chest, in the quiet thrill that comes when music sweeps through a group of people who have nowhere else to go. The alewife, no longer simply a dispenser of drink, now acts as conductor, orchestrating the chaos. She raises her hand, signals a pause, and the fiddler bows. Then she gestures to a man near the hearth, a traveler with a lopsided grin and a well-worn cloak. "Your turn," she says. And with that, the man begins a story, his voice low and smooth, drawing everyone closer. He speaks of a knight who lost his way in the forest and stumbled upon a hermit's hut. The hermit offered him a meal, but it was no ordinary food. Need was enchanted to reveal one's deepest fears. The knight, trying to be brave, laughed at the idea, only to discover that the dish contained a single black bean for each secret he had hidden from his lord. The crowd listens, enraptured, some leaning so close they nearly spill their mugs. Historians still argue whether such tales were purely fiction or subtle morality lessons, but here, at the heart of the alehouse, it barely matters. The story is alive, bending and twisting with every retelling. Another minstrel joins, tambourine in hand, clapping out a rhythm that matches the storyteller's cadence. The room hums with energy, voices joining in where lyrics repeat, feet stamping in time. Even the friar lifts his head from his corner, nodding along despite himself, eyes glittering with mischief. You catch his glance and realize he's enjoying it more than he would admit in daylight. The songs shift now, moving from tales of knights and hermits to bawdy jigs and love songs. A woman near the fire hums along softly, her lips curving in amusement as the lyrics take on playful double meanings. Couples glance at one another, exchanging secret smiles and glances that might be nothing or everything. You notice how the songs serve as a kind of language, an unspoken code that flirts with propriety while barely concealing mischief. A group of villagers begin a competition of sorts, testing who can hold the loudest voice without spilling their ale. The winner gets nothing but glory and the laughter of everyone else, but that's enough. You find yourself drawn into the fun, clapping along, your own voice rising with theirs. The moment is absurd, exhilarating, and utterly human. The storyteller pauses, letting the song carry the crowd forward, then leans close to whisper a tidbit that seems to ripple through the room like wildfire, a rumor about the Baron's steward and a missing ledger. Gasps and whispers follow. Some scoff, others lean in, and the air vibrates with curiosity. The mingling of song, story, and scandal is seamless. You realize that in this alehouse, no moment exists in isolation. Everything feeds everything else. The night stretches, and the energy doesn't wane. Each story sparks another. Each song demands a reply. A minor dispute breaks out over the proper words to a drinking song, prompting an impromptu debate. Feet shuffle, voices rise, and laughter carries over every protest. Even the dog under the table seems caught up, tail wagging in time to the music. You take a sip from your mug, noticing how the ale seems to taste different, now sweeter somehow. As if the stories themselves have infused it with a little magic. Someone hums a melancholy tune next, and the room leans into the softness. You close your eyes, letting the music and murmurs wash over you. There's warmth here, yes, but also a profound intimacy, a sense that the alehouse is more than wood and smoke. It is a vessel for humanity, flawed and radiant, where joy and sorrow cohabit in perfect, precarious balance. The storyteller's voice rises again, this time recounting a tale of clever peasants outwitting a greedy miller. The crowd roars with laughter at each twist, clapping and stomping until the floor trembles slightly. Even the alewife pauses to listen, her eyes gleaming as she nods at certain points, clearly appreciating the skill involved. You wonder how many of these stories are based in truth, how many are embroidered over generations. Historians still argue about the origins of oral storytelling in medieval villages, but for now, you don't care. You are here, and it is perfect. A fiddle squeaks, then harmonizes with a tambourine, creating a chaotic but joyful symphony. Feet shuffle and bump into one another. Someone drops a mug, and it shatters, but no one cares the music, and laughter simply absorb it. The night seems to pulse with life, and you feel it in your fingertips, in your spine, in the way your breath matches the rhythm. The friar leans forward suddenly, a rare smile breaking across his face. Perhaps, he mutters, music is prayer too, in its own clumsy way. The comment is half serious, half jest, and the room laughs. A young boy pipes up, trying to mimic the fiddler, creating a discordant, high-pitched version of the melody that only adds to the hilarity. As the hours creep toward the witching hour, the songs become softer, slower, almost hypnotic. One by one, villagers start humming along, their voices blending into the shadows, weaving a tapestry of sound that seems to suspend the night itself. You lean back against the wall, feeling the warmth of the fire, the comfort of drink, the thrill of stories, and the gentle pull of sleep waiting just beyond the edge. The alewife moves through the crowd once more, nodding to familiar faces, quietly encouraging a toast, here, a song there. Her presence is grounding, a reminder that the alehouse runs not on chance but on care and vigilance, patience, and the subtle authority of someone who knows every face, every habit, every secret. Somewhere in the far corner, a traveler begins telling a tale in a hushed tone, so mesmerizing that even the dog lifts its head. It is a story of love and loss, clever trickery, and unexpected fortune, winding through history, myth, and imagination. You realize the night has become a living thing, a breathing entity made from song, scandal, rumor, and shared human experience. The clock or what passes for one in the village marks another hour. You glance at the fire and the low, flickering candles. The night is almost spent, but the sense of wonder lingers. Every laugh, every whispered secret, every stomping foot is etched into your memory. You understand, perhaps for the first time, the magic of the medieval alehouse. It is not merely a place of drink, but a space where life stories are sung, shared, and immortalized, one song and one scandal at a time. The laughter thins for a while, replaced by the low murmur of voices trying to sound quiet but not quite succeeding. The room seems to sag a little, as if the air itself has grown heavier. You notice it first at the far end, near the flickering crucifix hung unevenly on the wall. Someone begins muttering a prayer, half sincere, half habit. It's strange how sin and sanctity can sit so comfortably side by side. One minute you're toasting St. Dunstan for keeping the devil at bay, and the next you're calling that same devil to bless your dice. You think, if heaven keeps a tally, this alehouse must make the angels dizzy. A friar sits close by, his brown robe stained with travel dust and ale foam. His tonsured scalp glints like polished wood in the candlelight. You've seen him watching the room with eyes that miss nothing, the whispered flirtations, the spilt coins, the hands too quick to cross themselves after a dirty story. He looks as though he's here to save souls, but something in his smirk says he's tallying more than sins tonight. Some say friars like him drink for the poor. Others whisper they simply drink like the poor. Historians still argue whether the medieval church turned a blind eye to the alehouse because it was a social necessity, or because even priests enjoyed a good brew after Vespers. You nurse your cup and lean against the timber wall, feeling the sticky grain under your palm. The alewife moves between tables like a queen among vassals, refilling jugs, trading gossip for coin. Yet, as she passes the friar, the warmth leaves her smile. You catch it. A quiet tension, a shared history, perhaps a confession best forgotten. In a village this small, everyone knows the edges of everyone else's story. A man at the hearth begins to tell a tale, scandal wrapped in a sermon. He swears he saw old Tom the Miller walking home last week with a candle burning over his head, the flame never flickering, though no wind stirred. The friar stiffens, pretending to ignore it. The storyteller, seeing he has the crowd's ear, continues. A sign, that is, he insists that Tom's got an unconfessed sin burning him from the inside. Mark my words, he'll cough up blood by Advent. The crowd gasps, half in dread, half in delight. You realize the alehouse isn't just where people drink, it's where they judge. Here, gossip becomes gospel faster than a parchment can dry. A single rumor can ruin a man faster than plague. It's intoxicating, this mix of fear and fascination. You sip your ale, and it tastes suddenly sharp, like judgment in liquid form. Across the room, two women whisper over a shared cup. One gestures subtly toward the friar. The other snickers, covering her mouth. You can imagine the stories, that he once danced naked at midsummer, that he fathered a child with the baker's daughter, that he hears confessions only to repeat them over ale. The friar catches their glance and frowns, then makes the sign of the cross with deliberate exaggeration. A few chuckles ripple through the crowd. The alewife returns, plopping a plate of boiled peas and bacon onto a nearby table. "Eat, lest your sins grow hungry too," she quips, earning laughter. But under the noise, the friar clears his throat. "It is said," he begins, voice smooth as oiled leather, "that alehouses are the devil's chapels." A few men groan. One yells, "Aye, but the sermons are shorter. Everyone laughs again, yet the friar presses on, quoting scripture half remembered. Be not drunk with wine, for that is debauchery. You lean closer. The room grows attentive in a strange, wary way. And yet, he continues, even Christ drank. Even monks brew. So perhaps it is not the drink that damns us but what we do when the cup is empty. He lifts his own tankard and drinks deeply. Laughter breaks the tension once more, but the thought lingers like smoke. Somewhere near the door, a man begins to hum a hymn out of key, but heartfelt. A few join in before someone else drowns it out with a bawdy tune. The melodies clash and mingle until they sound like the soul of the place itself, half sacred, half scandal. You realize the alehouse is its own kind of church. It has its congregation, its rituals, its saints and sinners. The only difference is that forgiveness here comes in a wooden mug. You wonder what confession would sound like in this place. Maybe not whispered in a booth, but shouted across the table. Sin met with laughter and another round. The medieval world is like that. You think always balancing between piety and pleasure, salvation and sin. You remember hearing that some towns even built alehouses beside churches, as if to make sure both heaven and earth got their due share of visitors. The fire crackles. A rat scurries near the wall, ignored by all. The air smells of sweat, yeast, and something faintly sweet, perhaps honey, spilled from someone's mead. The friar, emboldened by drink, begins to preach again, though now his words slur slightly. Repent, he mumbles, for the kingdom is nearer than your next cup. You wonder if he means it, or if it's just habit. A young man beside you leans in and says, they say in York, a friar ran an alehouse out of his cloister. Said it was for the pilgrim's comfort. He snorts. Comfort, aye, as, and the coins in his pouch grew fat. You laugh softly. Historians still argue, he adds with mock seriousness, whether that's corruption or just good business. You raise your cup in agreement. In a way, both might be true. The alewife takes the friar's empty tankard and refills it without a word. When she sets it down, their eyes meet sharp, lingering, complicated. Maybe she's remembering a sermon he gave against strong women. Or maybe they share something older, something neither confesses but both recall with regret. You suspect the latter. The noise swells again as someone proposes a toast to sins worth committing. The crowd cheers, cups clatter, and for a moment the alehouse becomes almost holy in its joy. People are laughing, forgiving, forgetting if only for the night. And yet beneath that mirth, you sense the edge of guilt that shadows this century like a cloud. The church tells people joy is dangerous, pleasure fleeting, and the world itself a test. Still, they drink, they sing, they flirt. Because for all the sermons, people remain stubbornly human. A man nearby begins to confess not to the friar, but to whoever will listen. I cheated the reeve, he says, took more grain than my due. Someone laughs, slaps his back, and says, then drink to your cleverness before he finds out. The confessor grins, relieved. Redemption, alehouse style. Another voice rises, a woman's this time, and I, she says, lied to my husband. Told him the alewife shorted me coin, but it was I who bought ribbons. There's laughter, applause, a few mock-serious gasps. Ah, but what color were they? Someone calls, she smirks. Red as sin. The crowd roars approval. The friar shakes his head, but even he smiles a little. You can't help but notice how confession here isn't about absolution. It's about belonging. Sharing a misdeed becomes a kind of communion. The more you admit, the closer the crowd draws to you, as if sin were just another shared joke in this flickering world. Outside, a cold wind rattles the shutters. The candles flicker. Someone mutters that it's a sign the devil walks by. Someone else says it's only the wind, and besides, the devil's already in the room. More laughter. The friar pretends to scowl, but you catch his grin. You wonder if God minds. Maybe, You think he listens too from some corner of heaven, chuckling over the chaos of his creations. Maybe that's the secret medieval people understood, that faith and folly aren't opposites, but partners in the same dance. As the night deepens, the friar finally slumps over the table, snoring softly. The alewife covers him with an old wool cloak. "Let him sleep," she says. "Tomorrow he'll call us sinners again, and we'll forgive him." You can't tell if that's pity, affection, or just the rhythm of life. You swirl the dregs in your mug and think about how thin the line is between sin and survival, between drinking to forget and drinking to remember, between sermon and song. A new voice begins to hum again this time, a lullaby in Latin, soft and haunting. Even the roughest men quiet down to listen. The words drift upward like smoke, mingling with the scent of ale and wood ash. For a moment, you feel something sacred rise inside the noise. The alehouse, for all its scandal, holds its own kind of grace. The hush doesn't last. You should have known it wouldn't. The lullaby fades, and in its place comes a rising murmur, the kind that sounds like distant thunder before a storm. Someone has lost a coin, or claims they have. Someone else swears he saw it drop and vanish under a neighbor's boot. The tension creeps in like a chill draft, invisible but biting. You feel the shift before it happens, the sudden staleness in the air, the change in laughter's pitch. You've seen it before. The moment when camaraderie turns to competition, when ale becomes ammunition. A single spark in this room and the night could turn rough in a heartbeat. A burly mason stands, cheeks flushed crimson, fist clenched around a tankard. "You calling me a thief?" he bellows. The crowd hushes, just enough for you to hear the other man reply, "Only if your conscience says so." There it is, the spark. The tankard slams down. Ale splashes across the table. The wooden benches groan as people pull back, widening the circle the way villagers always do when a fight brews, half hoping it'll stop, half hoping it won't. You slide slightly to the side, out of range, because wisdom often means keeping your nose intact. The alewife sighs audibly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Again?" she mutters, more weary than angry. You get the sense this isn't the first time her floorboards have seen blood. The two men circle, puffed up with drink and pride. The mason raises a finger, as if preaching. "God sees all," he warns. The other snorts. "Aye, but he's no witness in this alehouse." The crowd laughs nervously, unsure which way to lean. The friar, still half asleep in his corner, mutters something about peace and brotherhood. No one listens. You think, for a society so obsessed with salvation, medieval folk have a very flexible approach to turning the other cheek. There's a shove, then another. A bench tips over. The fire spits as embers leap from the hearth, like tiny red witnesses. Someone shouts, "Not the ale," which might be the most heartfelt plea of the evening. The mason lunges, grabs his opponent's collar, and the two go sprawling into a mess of cups and elbows. The room erupts cheers, shouts, groans. A dog barks wildly. You can't help but feel a grim amusement. It's chaos, yes, but it's almost ritualized chaos. This is the safety valve of village life, the place where grudges get aired and tempers reset. Historians still argue whether medieval alehouses promoted community or chaos. Watching this, you think the answer is both. The same place that united people in song could split them apart over a spilled drink. The alewife doesn't waste time. She strides forward, grabs a ladle from the brewing kettle, and whacks it sharply against the nearest head knot, enough to kill, just enough to sting. "Out," she commands, voice cutting through the roar like a bell at matins. "Both of you, before you crack my tables." The fighters freeze, blinking as though she's cast a spell. Then, slowly, grudgingly, they stumble toward the door. The crowd parts. A few people clap mockingly. "Go confess to the pigsty." Someone jeers. The alewife follows him out, still holding the ladle like a scepter. You hear the door slam behind them, the muffled sound of angry muttering, and then silence. Not peace, but the kind of silence that waits, breath held, to see if the storm's truly over. You look around. The floor is littered with overturned stools, spilled ale, and a broken plate. But within moments, the crowd begins to laugh again. Someone shouts for another round. The danger dissolves as quickly as it appeared. Maybe that's the trick of survival. Here you break, you brawl, you mend. You remember reading once that medieval courts often held hearings inside alehouses because they were the only communal spaces large enough. Imagine that justice being dispensed over the same tables where fights like this happen. You picture a reeve sitting at the head, trying to look solemn while flies circle the beer foam. Justice, but make it sticky. The alewife returns, shaking her head. Men, she says, exhaling hard. They spill more ale than they drink. She catches your eye, smirks, and pours you a fresh cup. At least you've the sense to keep your seat. You thank her, and she shrugs. Sense? No, just good shoes. Easier to run. You both laugh. The noise in the room begins to swell again, conversation slowly rebuilding itself, like a song picking up after a dropped verse. It's strange how fast people move on here. But maybe when life is as fragile as theirs, you learn not to waste time on grudges. At the far end, a young man starts tuning his fiddle again, the same one who played earlier. A song someone calls. A loud one, so the devil knows we're still merry. He grins and obliges, sawing the bow across the strings until a jig bursts forth, bright and clumsy. Feet start stamping. The fight is already fading into legend. You take a sip, the ale now warm and thick. It tastes faintly metallic, maybe from the cup or maybe from the faint blood you saw splatter earlier. Either way, you drink. The alehouse runs on the principle that everything pain, joy, rumor, song must be swallowed. Nearby, a woman stitches a torn sleeve while her husband watches with drunken affection. Another man teaches his son how to toss dice without letting them bounce off the table. There's a strange domestic calm returning, like the aftermath of a summer storm when the fields steam and the air smells sweet again. A traveler from the next village leans in to tell you how once an entire alehouse burned down because two men argued over whose pig was fatter. They rebuilt it, he says, grinning, right on the same spot. Said it'd be bad luck not to. You laugh. He adds, lowering his voice. They say you can still hear the pig squeal when the wind blows just right. The table bursts into uneasy laughter. That's another thing about this world. Superstition is never far behind humor. Every fight, every accident, every burned-down alehouse is someone's omen. The friar, now half awake, mumbles something about wrath and divine punishment, but nobody's really listening. You find yourself watching the fire again. Its light flickers across the walls, catching the carved initials of past patrons etched into the wood. You imagine how many of those names belong to men who swore they'd never returned, then did the very next night. Suddenly, the door bursts open again. The cold rushes in, carrying the sound of a scuffle outside. The two men are at it again, rolling in the mud this time. The alewife sighs and mutters. Fine, let the mud judge them. The door swings shut. The warmth returns. You can't help but smile. It's almost poetic how, even after blood and bruises, life simply goes on. The medieval world had no luxury of clean endings. Disputes faded not because they were solved, but because people got tired or drunk, or both. A few minutes later, one of the fighters stumbles back in, face smeared with dirt, a sheepish grin on his lips. We're square, he says. He says I can keep the coin if I buy him ale. The crowd laughs, and someone shouts, then buy two, and we'll call it holy. Peace, medieval style. You realize something: this alehouse is a kind of mirror for the whole society around it. Order and chaos, virtue and vice, always dancing in the same circle. And through it all, people endure. They may fight, but they'll also share bread with the same hands that swung fists. You lean back, watching the flicker of lamplight, listening to the steady thump of feet on the floorboards. There's comfort in the imperfection of it all. The broken furniture, the shouting, the laughter, it's all part of the rhythm. Somewhere, a voice slurs an apology. Another answers, "Think nothing of it. The ale made us kin again." You smile at that. Maybe that's why alehouses mattered so much. In a world where life could end with the next harvest, every night like this was a rehearsal for forgiveness. Historians still debate whether alehouses weakened moral order or strengthened communal ties. Watching this, you decide it's both the same way a storm nourishes and destroys. It tears the air, then clears it. The crowd's laughter grows until even the friar joins in again, shaking his head, his earlier sermon forgotten. The alewife refills the mugs, muttering something about keeping the peace with the pitcher. The music picks up speed, and soon you're caught in it, clapping, swaying, laughing along. The alehouse becomes alive again, not just with noise, but with that shared pulse that makes people forget, for a few precious hours, how hard life really is. And then, as if to remind everyone of reality, someone blows out a candle too fast, and smoke curls upward in a ghostly ribbon. For a heartbeat, it looks like a soul rising from a battlefield. You blink, and it's gone. Maybe that's what the night is, one long battle between joy and ruin, constantly fought and never truly won. Still, as you lift your mug one last time, you realize you're grateful to be here, in this exact moment, bruised and breathless among strangers who feel strangely like friends. Outside, the wind howls over the thatched roofs. Inside, the alehouse roars louder. The storm outside fades into a steady drizzle, and with it, the raucous cheer begins to ebb. The night has worn itself thin, like the last thread on an old tunic. You notice the candles burning low, their wax pooling and hardening into strange little sculptures on the tables. The smell of smoke, spilled ale, and humanity mingles into something oddly comforting familiar, like the aftertaste of laughter. The minstrels have stopped playing. One of them snores softly in the corner, his lute still in his lap. The alewife moves slower now, collecting cups, stacking plates, wiping down the chaos with the calm of someone who has done this 1,000 times before. The air is thick and tired, like a song that knows its last verse is near. You look around, realizing how many have already gone home. The mason and his coin-argument friend are gone, leaving muddy footprints by the door. The friar's head has sunk onto his folded arms again, breath rattling with ale-soaked snores. Even the dog has curled up under the table, chasing dreams of bones and spilled stew. Only a few linger, an old shepherd tracing circles on the rim of his cup. Two lovers whispering by the hearth, and you an observer wrapped in smoke and silence. The energy of the evening has melted into a strange, gentle stillness. You take one last sip of your ale. It's warm now, more bitter than before, but it fits the moment. It's the kind of taste that stays with you long after you leave. Like memory does, sweet, sharp, impossible to separate from everything else. The alewife catches your eye and gives a small, knowing smile. "You've lasted longer than most," she says softly, voice worn smooth by years of shouting over noise. "But it's near cockcrow. Time to let the night rest." You nod. She doesn't rush you, though. No one does. The medieval world might be harsh in daylight taxes, toil, and tidespot in the alehouse. There's mercy. Time bends a little here. It lets you linger. You glance toward the window. The shutters are still closed, but a faint gray light seeps through the cracks. Dawn is coming. The songs are over, the laughter spent, and what remains feels almost holy in its exhaustion. The lovers by the hearth stand, their hands still touching. The woman tucks a strand of hair behind her ear and whispers something you can't hear. The man laughs softly, a sound gentler than anything you've heard all night. Then they go, stepping into the pale light beyond the door. You watch the smoke follow them out, like the last sigh of the fire. The shepherd yawns, mutters something about his sheep, and stumbles away too. Soon, it's just you and the alewife. She kneels by the hearth, stirring the embers, coaxing one last flicker before letting it die. You realize that the alehouse at rest looks entirely different. The shadows stretch longer, the silence heavier, but there's no menace in it, only the echo of what was. "Do you ever get tired of it?" you ask quietly. She glances up, half smiling. "Of the noise? The stink? The fools who think ale makes them poets." She pokes at the coals. "Every day. But then I remember, it keeps the world turning. Men drink, fight, sing, fall in love, and drink again. It's not much, but it's life." You nod, because what else is there to say? She wipes her hands on her apron, then gestures toward the door. "Go on then. The morning's waiting. Don't let it find you asleep here, or I'll start charging rent." You stand, legs a little stiff. The floor creaks beneath you, sticky in places where ale has dried. You take one last look around the rough tables, the soot-stained walls, the lingering warmth in the air. Every inch of it feels alive, even now. The ghosts of laughter hang like cobwebs. As you reach for the latch, you hear a voice behind you, the friar, half awake, muttering into his sleeve. "Pray for us sinners," he mumbles, "now and at the hour of last call." You can't help but grin. Even holiness, it seems, has a sense of humor here. You push the door open, and the dawn greets you like an old friend you'd almost forgotten. The air is cold and damp, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and wood smoke. The village lies quiet, rooftops beaded with dew, chickens just beginning to stir, a cart creaking somewhere in the distance. You step out, the door closing softly behind you. The warmth of the alehouse clings to you for a few steps before the morning air steals it away. It's strange, this world you've spent the night inside, loud, messy, and endlessly human. You think about everything you've seen, the laughter, the gossip, the quarrels, the songs that turned into prayers. It's all still humming somewhere behind that door. You wonder if you'll ever really leave it behind. Maybe that's what places like this do, they mark you, in small ways you only notice later. The smell of malt on your hands, the echo of a voice you can't name, the warmth of shared humanity that lingers like an aftertaste. You walk down the dirt path toward the edge of the village. The sun is just a pale streak above the trees, but it's enough to paint everything in faint gold. You pass a few villagers on their way to the fields, bleary-eyed but smiling. Some of them were there last night. You exchange nods, quiet acknowledgments that no one will speak of what happened inside. The alehouse is both public and private, memory and myth. A rooster crows. Somewhere, a bell rings for matins. The world starts again, as it always does, indifferent to the stories people make in its shadow. But for a brief, wonderful moment, you feel as though you've glimpsed something eternal in that smoky room, the fragile thread that ties joy to survival. Maybe that's what medieval life really was, not endless toil or blind faith, but these small, glowing hours when people allowed themselves to be fully, imperfectly alive. You glance back once more. The alehouse stands quiet now, chimney smoking gently, door bolted shut. Inside, the embers will fade to ash, waiting for evening to bring them back to life. You imagine the alewife resting for a few stolen hours before the next batch of barley needs mashing. The next cask must be tapped. The next crowd will come laughing through her door. And you realize this isn't an ending, it's a rhythm. Every night a story, every morning a reset. The cycle of sin and song, of spilled ale and spilled secrets keeps turning like the millstone down by the river. You take a deep breath. The chill wakes you fully. Birds begin to stir in the hedges, their calls sharp and hopeful. The world feels wide and quiet, as if even God is still stretching after his own long night. You smile. Whatever happens next, you've survived another medieval evening which, by all accounts, is an achievement worth toasting.